Before you read another word, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. We love knowing where our Ivory Secrets family is tuning in from across Canada and beyond. Now settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. She had packed his good cufflinks in her carry-on, not out of spite. That was the part that would take him years to understand. She had packed them because she thought, even at the end, that she was doing him a favor. 14 months later, Connor Whitfield walked into a preschool holiday concert at St. Anne's Community Center in Halifax, and the first thing he saw was his ex-wife standing beside a little girl who was gripping a paper snowflake with both hands, and the snowflake had 6 points, and the little girl had his grandmother's red hair. He stopped walking. A man behind him bumped into his shoulder and said sorry twice, and Connor didn't register either one. The girl was maybe 4, maybe just turning 5. She had a gap between her front teeth, and she was wearing a plaid dress that was slightly too big for her. And she was swaying back and forth on her heels, the way Connor himself swayed when he was nervous about something. His sister had pointed it out at his first board presentation 15 years ago. His mother used to call it the Whitfield Rock. The girl was doing the Whitfield Rock, and standing 2 feet away from her, holding her coat and not yet looking in his direction, was Simone. Connor Whitfield was 43 years old, and he had built the kind of career that looked, from the outside, like the product of relentless ambition. In practice, it was simpler than that. He had grown up in a house where money was a source of quiet, persistent anxiety, and he had decided at 17 that he would not live that way. He had gotten good at reading markets the way other people got good at reading rooms, and by the time he was 38, he had taken a mid-sized Halifax real estate development firm and turned it into something that people in Toronto and Vancouver had started paying attention to. He had married Simone Leclerc when he was 35. She was a contracts paralegal with a precise mind and a laugh that arrived without warning. And he had loved her in the specific way of a man who had spent most of his adult life being competent and had never expected competence to be enough to make someone stay. She made him feel like it was. That was the thing about Simone. She made the parts of him that were good at spreadsheets and negotiation feel like they were also good at being a person. The marriage lasted 3 years. The way it ended was not dramatic. That was what Connor would tell people if anyone asked, which no one really did. There was no single event, no discovered secret, no irreparable argument. There was instead a slow accumulation of distances, weeks where they were both traveling, months where they were both tired, a dinner in January's where they sat across from each other and talked about a renovation project, and then went to bed, and Connor lay in the dark and thought, with a clarity that frightened him, this is not sustainable. He had said it out loud the following week. Simone had not cried. She had looked at the kitchen table for a long moment, and then she had said, I know. And then she had asked him if he thought they could fix it, and he had said he didn't know, and she had said she wasn't sure she had the energy to find out, and that was more or less that. The lawyers handled the rest. There were no children. There was a condo in the South End they'd bought together, which she kept. There were 2 cats, which she also kept, which was fair because they'd always been more hers. Connor moved into a rented house near the water and went back to working 14-hour days and told himself this was fine, this was reasonable. People separated all the time. People recovered. He hadn't thought about the possibility that there was something he didn't know. Simone looked up and saw him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The community center was loud around them. Other parents arriving, children running, someone on the PA system testing a microphone. And in the middle of it, Connor stood completely still, and Simone's expression moved through something complicated and landed on careful. She crossed the room. The little girl came with her, still holding the snowflake, still swaying. Connor, Simone said. Her voice was level. It had always been level, even now. Hi, he said. That was all he had. He looked at the girl. The girl looked at him with the frank, unfiltered evaluation that children have before they learn to be polite about it. This is Rosie, Simone said. And then, before he could ask anything, she added very quietly, she's 4. The number landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. 4, he repeated. Yes, Simone, he stopped. Start it again. She has my grandmother's hair. Simone closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. When she opened them, she said, I know. The little girl tugged on Simone's sleeve and said, Mayman, is this the tall man from the picture? And Simone looked at her daughter and then looked at Connor and said carefully and completely, Yes, sweetheart. That's him. What Connor Whitfield did not do in the days that followed was fall apart. This was not because he didn't want to. There was something large and disorganized moving through him that wanted very much to find an exit. And he was aware of it the way you're aware of a storm system on a radar, tracking its position, calculating its trajectory, keeping an eye on it without letting it make landfall in a way he couldn't manage. What he did instead was the thing he was best at. He gathered information. He called his lawyer on a Friday morning and had a conversation that was careful and specific and did not involve the word paternity because he was not yet ready to say that word out loud to another human being. He made notes. He made a list of what he knew and a longer list of what he didn't. He cooked dinner both nights of that weekend and ate it alone and stared out at the inlet and thought about a 4-year-old girl swaying on her heels in a plaid dress, what he knew. Simone had not told him. Simone had left their marriage, had packed her things and his cufflinks and taken the cats and gone, and there had been a reason she hadn't told him, and he did not yet know what that reason was. What he suspected, the reason was not simple. He had been with Simone for 5 years, total. 3 married, 2 dating. He knew her. She was not careless. She was not cruel. If she had decided not to tell him something, she had decided. There was architecture to that decision, and he needed to understand it before he said or did anything else. He called her on a Tuesday. She picked up on the second ring. I want to understand what happened, he said. I'm not calling to make accusations. I genuinely want to understand. There was a pause on her end. Then, can you come over Thursday evening? After 7. She'll be asleep by then. The house was a rental in the North End, a narrow 2-story with a yellow door that looked like Simone had chosen it. She answered before he finished knocking. She was in a cardigan he didn't recognize, and she looked, he thought, tired in a specific way. Not the tired of a bad night, but the tired of a long time. She made tea. He sat at her kitchen table and looked at the drawings stuck to the fridge. A horse with 7 legs, a sun that was also possibly a spider, a figure with red crayon hair labeled in careful, effortful printing. She wrote her own name. Connor said. 6 months ago. She was very proud of it. Simone set the mugs down and sat across from him. She's been asking about you. He looked at her. She knows who I am. I have a photo from our wedding. I kept it because... She stopped, pressed her fingers against the mug. I kept it because I didn't want her to grow up not knowing your face. Connor sat with that for a moment. Then he said, Tell me from the beginning. The beginning, it turned out, was not the end of their marriage. The beginning was 8 months before the end, when Simone had started to suspect something was wrong, and had taken a test in the bathroom at work on a Wednesday morning because she couldn't stand to do it at home and have it be real. In the rooms where they lived together. She had been 8 weeks along when she decided she needed to tell him. She had made a plan. She had been going to tell him on a Saturday. On the Thursday before that Saturday, she had been at a dinner, a work event, a firm anniversary celebration at a restaurant downtown, and she had overheard a conversation. Connor's mother had been there, Eleanor Whitfield, who had been a friend of one of the senior partners for 20 years, who had attended enough of these events that no one questioned her presence. Simone had been in the hallway outside the private dining room, and she had heard Eleanor's voice, and she had heard her own name. She told Connor what she had heard in a flat, careful voice. It had been a conversation between Eleanor and a woman Simone didn't recognize, and it had been about Simone's suitability, which Eleanor had apparently been discussing for some time. It wasn't violent. It wasn't even particularly original. It was the quiet, sustained, socially fluent kind of dismissal that leaves no fingerprints. The I love my son, and I want what's best for him kind. The she's perfectly nice, but kind. The I worry he settled kind. The kind that is designed to sound like concern, while functioning like erosion. She'd been talking to him, Simone said, for months, I found out later. Not dramatic things. Just, she shook her head. Small things. said at the right time. Connor seems distracted. Connor seems unhappy. I wonder if he's carrying something he shouldn't have to carry. That kind of thing. Connor was quiet for a long moment. And you thought, he said slowly, that if you told me about the pregnancy, I thought she would find a way to make it into something she could use, Simone said. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you didn't trust me to handle it, I know. Did you think I wouldn't want? He stopped. The sentence had edges he wasn't ready to touch. Simone looked at him. I thought you were already halfway out the door, and I thought if I told you you'd stay for the wrong reason, or she'd find a way to make you resent me for trapping you. I thought. She put her hands flat on the table. I thought the kindest thing I could do was go. Connor sat with this for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A branch moved against the kitchen window. Somewhere upstairs his daughter was sleeping. That was not the right call, he said. I know. You should have told me. I know, Connor. I'm going to need you to understand that I'm not going to pretend this is small. I missed 4 years, I know. Her voice stayed steady. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. He asked for a paternity test. She didn't protest. It came back 3 weeks later with a result that surprised no one who had seen Rosie doing the Whitfield rock, and Connor took the document and sat in his car in the parking lot of the lab for 11 minutes without starting the engine. Then he started the engine and drove to a toy store and spent 45 minutes trying to figure out what a 4-year-old who had recently drawn a son that was also possibly a spider might like, and left with a set of watercolor paints and a book about a bear who builds a boat, which the woman at the register assured him was very good. The question of Eleanor was harder. Connor had loved his mother in the uncomplicated way of an only child who had not yet had reason to examine the shape of that love. She was direct and organized, and had been the most reliable person in his childhood. He called her every Sunday. He had taken her to Portugal 2 years ago for her 70th birthday. He drove to her house in Dartmouth on a Saturday afternoon early, when the ground was hard with frost and the birch trees in her front garden had gone bare. She made him coffee. She asked about a project he was working on. She was warm and specific, and exactly herself. And Connor sat across from her and thought about what it meant to know someone your whole life and still have gaps. He told her what Simone had told him. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I was trying to protect you. From what? From a situation that. She stopped, started again, with more care. I had concerns about the marriage, Connor. I had them for a long time. I didn't think she was. I know what you thought, Connor said. Simone told me what you said verbatim. Another silence. Eleanor looked at her coffee. I have a daughter, Connor said. I have a 4-year-old daughter who doesn't know my name yet. And I miss that because you decided, at some point, that your concerns about my marriage were more important than my right to know what was happening in my own life. That's not what. I'm not asking you to agree with how I've characterized it. I'm telling you how it is. He kept his voice level. He had learned this from her, he realized distantly. The particular flatness of a serious conversation. I'm not going to cut you out of my life. You're my mother. And Rosie is going to need grandparents, and I want her to know you. But I need you to understand that what you did caused a harm that I am still figuring out how to account for. And I need you to say that you understand that, not defend it, not explain it. Just say you understand. Eleanor looked at her son for a long time. Her face moved through something he hadn't seen before. Then she said quietly, I understand. It didn't fix anything. Connor hadn't expected it to. He had a project manager at work who said closure is a myth every time someone used the word, and Connor had always found this annoying. But standing in his mother's driveway in December, breathing cold air, and feeling neither resolved nor unresolved, but something more like continuing, he thought the project manager might have a point. He texted Simone when he got home. I talked to her. It went as well as it could. Can I take Rosie to the park on Sunday? There was a pause of about 20 minutes. Then, she likes the one on Quinpool better than the one on South, more swings. Good to know, he wrote back. She'll probably ask you a lot of questions, Simone sent. Fair warning. She's been told you're her dad. She has been processing this for approximately 2 weeks and has a lot of opinions. What kind of questions? Last night, she asked me why dads don't live in the same house as moms. I told her that sometimes people love each other in different ways, and she said, like how I love waffles, but you love crepes. And I said, sure, and she said, so do you love dad, like waffles or crepes? And I genuinely had no answer. Connor read this twice. Then he typed, for what it's worth, I was always more of a waffle person. Another pause. Then a single laughing emoji, and then nothing. And Connor put his phone down and looked out at the inlet and thought that this was not a resolution. This was a beginning of something he didn't have a name for yet, and it was going to be uneven and complicated, and there were going to be moments that were very hard, and he was going to have to be patient in the specific way that does not come naturally to men who have spent 20 years being very good at making decisions. But he had a daughter who swayed on her heels when she was nervous. He had a daughter who drew sons that might also be spiders, and who had asked her mother a question about waffles and crepes that Connor suspected was, in its own 4-year-old way, more philosophically rigorous than most of the conversations he'd had with adults. In the last year, he could work with that. The first Sunday at the park on Quinpool was exactly as advertised. Rosie had questions. She asked him what his job was. He said he built buildings. She asked if he could build a treehouse. He said he'd look into it. She asked if he had any pets. He said no. She looked at him with frank evaluative disappointment and said, we have 2 cats. Their names are Biscuit and Terrible. He asked why one of them was called Terrible. She said, very seriously, because she is. He pushed her on the swings for 22 minutes. He knew the exact number because she counted. She was learning to count to 100, and she needed practice. When Simone came to pick her up, Rosie ran to her mother and immediately started narrating the afternoon. Connor stood a few feet away and listened to his daughter report at considerable speed that the park had ducks, and Connor didn't have any pets, but she was going to ask him to meet Terrible next time, and also could they have waffles for dinner. Simone caught his eye over the top of Rosie's head. He lifted one shoulder. She lifted one corner of her mouth. It was not a reunion. He wasn't sure yet what it was. There was a lot that still needed to be said, and a lot that probably couldn't be, and a long distance between the people they'd been in that marriage and whoever they were now. He knew that. He was not in the habit of collapsing distances just because he wanted them to be shorter. But they were in the same park on a Sunday, and his daughter wanted him to meet a cat named Terrible, and the light was doing something good over the rooftops on Quinpool, and Connor Whitfield drove home that evening, thinking about the specific word yet. He didn't have all of it figured out yet. He wasn't sure he needed to. He just needed to keep showing up to the park on Sundays, and to the school concerts, and to the waffle breakfasts when Simone, eventually, cautiously, started suggesting them. With a small person who needed practice. He thought he could do that. He thought, for the first time in a long time, that being good at the small things might turn out to be enough.